Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the Fifth Avenue Project. We are back at it with another episode. Hope everybody had a Merry Christmas out there and spent time with friends and family and all that good stuff. I want to have a quick review on net neutrality and the repeal of it. You know, a lot of people, there's a bunch of videos floating around out there, people talking about net neutrality, everybody panicking, this and that. What I want to do is come from an angle where, you know, I explain where we came from, where we are today, and what it means for the future. All right, so we're just going to do it in 3 stages. I can't get into the detail of each act, each title, each regulation. As you guys know, sometimes these acts and regulations are hundreds of pages long. I'm just going to skim it from the top and let you guys understand what everything means in a nutshell. After this video, you'll be able to cast an opinion on where you stand with the news that we got back on December 14th, all right? So let's take it from the top. You know, back in 2017, a new FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, hope I pronounced that right, was appointed by Donald Trump. Fast forward to December 14th, a final vote on Ajit Pai's proposal to repeal net neutrality took place. The FCC voted 3-2 to end net neutrality. And that's what the big fuss is about. Everybody and their mother is talking about it. We'll get to why in a second. All right, so unfortunately, in the eyes of most, Ajit Pai got his way. So what does this mean? And is this the end of open internet as we know it? Before we move forward though, let's take a brief look at history. The last time Congress passed a major legislation for regulating the internet was back in '96 with the Telecommunications Act of 1996, signed by Bill Clinton. The act promised to promote competition and increase quality, lower prices. This was good for everybody. But in a lot of ways, the opposite ended up happening. Let me explain. With radio and TV, for example, the act gave anyone the ability to own as many radio and or TV stations as they wanted, with some stipulations, of course. The act impacted phone companies as well, which were tied to the internet. Remember, the act came at a time before many of the high-speed internet technologies we use today were made available. Early on, we accessed the internet through dial-up, and we later transitioned to DSL, both of which were done through the use of phone lines, which were routed through telephone networks. So if it impacted the phone companies, it basically impacted the internet back in the mid-90s. So back then, our phone lines were primarily what gave us access to the internet. That was on the provider side. On the consumer side, the technology we use to access the internet changed over the years as well. Things like cell phones, tablets, smart TVs, etc., etc. So the Telecom Act affected the internet because of how the rules applied to phone companies. If you want to learn more about the Telecom Act, there's plenty of resources out there. I'm just trying to make everything come full circle in this particular video. So up until 2005, ISPs were known as common carriers. This meant that the FCC regulated ISPs like phone companies. These regulations prevented phone companies from charging their customers extra money for using dial-up services as well as DSL services over those same lines. When everything went from dial-up to DSL, the common carriers, the ISPs, were left with no choice but to have competitors use those same phone lines. While the ISPs did not like this was great for customers as it created more competition, gave people more options to choose from, lowered prices, all that good stuff. But what about the new ways to access the internet, such as fiber and satellite, that don't require phone lines? Should the old rules, which are aimed at phone companies, still apply to newer technology? Well, the FCC did not think so. In 2005, the FCC reclassified internet access across phone networks as information service. ISP were no longer to be seen as common carriers. This meant ISPs were no longer regulated like phone companies, and no regulation meant less choices and higher prices for the consumer. Unfortunately, as time passed, the smaller companies either died off or merged with the larger companies. The number of ISPs dwindled down. There's not much choices in your neighborhood if you look around. There just aren't many choices for high-speed internet in most areas. 2/3 of the country have 2 or fewer choices in their area for ISPs. So what happens if your ISP starts blocking you, slowing you down as a result of the repealing of net neutrality? What options do you have, really? That's the problem I think people have, you know. You're making the rule changes, but the options are few and far between, very limited. Okay, now that we got that out the way, let's carefully break down net neutrality once again, because there's a bunch of videos on it out there, but I just want to break it down very quickly. If you want more in-depth information on net neutrality, all the nooks and crannies, all the little tidbits, there are a bunch of videos out there. I'm just quickly going over it again for those who are not quite familiar with it. Most of you are, but if you're not, this video is good for you. If you are, this is basically a review. So back in 2015, the FCC labeled broadband internet as a Title II, which basically made ISPs treat traffic equally across the board. Okay, so under Title II, the internet is seen as a public utility, and ISPs were viewed as common carriers again. In many people's eyes, Title II protects the free and open internet. Your ISP can control the speed of your traffic. They can't charge you more for going to certain sites or using certain apps. They can't charge you more for using bandwidth-heavy services like YouTube, Facebook, Netflix, Spotify, things like that. Under a Title II, ISPs treat all traffic equally. No slowdown or throttling. No paying for fast lanes. If net neutrality is going for good, ISPs will most likely start favoring websites and apps that benefit them. And ultimately, if you don't go to a website or a service that the ISP favors, you would either have to pay more or you will be purposely slowed down. Remember when AT&T forced Apple to block Skype? What about when Comcast slowed down your internet connection if you were streaming content via Netflix? Ultimately forcing Netflix to pay Comcast to end the slowdown. Without net neutrality, ISP could do things like this and turn it up a few notches. Because think about it, they were already doing it with certain rules in place. If you remove certain regulations, they may act calm for the first couple of years, but then you never know what can happen down the line. Those two examples right there illustrate how things can be if you loosen the noose a little bit. So all in all, ISPs will be able to block you, slow you down, prevent you from going to their competitors, create fast lanes, yada, yada, yada. Now, from the very beginning, Ajit Pai, his plan was always to go against Title II, in which ISPs act as common carriers and take away net neutrality. Some people just say it's BS straight up, you know. Once they pay for something, they should be able to view what they want, when they want it, for how long, without any compromises. And guys, no Pornhub comments, man. But let's talk about the content providers. What does this mean for them? We're talking about the consumers and the ISP, but what about the content providers like Google, Facebook, Netflix? Well, content providers like those I just mentioned are in favor of net neutrality because even though some of their content soaks up more bandwidth than, let's say, a regular website, a plain text website, or email, ISPs under a Title II couldn't charge them extra to get the content over to us. But without net neutrality, content providers like Facebook, like Google, Netflix, etc. will need to pay more to the ISPs for their bandwidth-heavy services. On top of that, ISPs will most likely charge their customers more for accessing the websites and applications that take up more bandwidth. Now, I hear a lot of people saying, oh, the repealing of net neutrality has nothing to do with the consumer. It's only going to affect the content provider. But let me just tell you something. If it affects the content provider, it may ultimately trickle down to us. It's like you know, I live in New York City. Let's say in Manhattan, right? You have an apartment in Manhattan. If taxes go up and the prices of utilities go up and everything goes up, guess what's going to happen to your rent? Even though it had nothing to do with you initially, guess what the landlord or the owner of the building is going to say? Prices went up, cost of living went up, so we got to charge you a little extra to cover that. So just keep that in mind when a lot of you say, don't worry, we're not going to feel the impact. Yeah, maybe not in the first few months, but believe me, down the line, everybody's in the business to make money, man. Don't ever think somebody's doing it for your best interest and solely for that. Whatever decision people are making, at the end of the day, it's all for the dollar. So just keep that in mind. And according to Ajit Pai, all they would have to do is provide transparency. In other words, ISPs will have to tell the customer, hey, we're going to block you, censor you, or make you pay extra depending on what sites and apps you use. It's like telling somebody, hey man, I'm about to rob you, take your car, steal your wife. But because I told you, I really can't do much about it. I mean, that's what it feels like to me, but that's just me. Ajit Pai says the change will not be that big of a deal. I don't know about that, because this is only at the beginning stages. Of course, they're not going to just, you know, do a complete 180 and just turn the internet upside down. But what about 3 years from now, 5 years from now, even 10 years from now? But a lot of people are saying this will ultimately lead to more control for the government, even though it looks like lifting the regulations prevents government involvement. Some people are saying in the long run, it will give the government more control. And this also means more money for the ISPs, the small companies, the content providers, and the consumers suffer in the end. Now, despite the majority of Americans opposing the repealing of net neutrality, the FCC, led by Ajit Pai, definitely have won this round. However, the fight is still not quite over. Congress can still overturn the decision. Actually, several states are even suing, including my home state of New York. So defend net neutrality is not over. Contact your congressmen and other local and federal representatives. Congress could definitely overthrow the decision. It may be a long shot, but you guys have to fight. Now, I'm definitely not into politics like that, but I know that at the moment, in order to overturn the decision made by the FCC, you're going to need 218 House members to overturn the decision. And just so you guys know, there's 435 members. That's why I tell people, you know, just let your voice be heard. Call your congressmen, local and federal officials. Congress at this point is the only way that somebody can step in and save net neutrality. It's the only way. I mean, at the moment, it has been repealed, but again, Congress can step in. It's a long shot. It's definitely possible. I'm going to leave some links in the description box below so you guys can read up on some information and get well versed in it. I don't want to make a whole video series on this or nothing like that. There's a bunch of information already available. I'm just doing a quick review where we are currently and what we can expect in the future. So check the links in the description box for more on net neutrality and how you can save it if you're interested. However, if you're on the other side of the fence and you're happy that net neutrality was repealed, without trolling, leave a comment below and tell the people why the repealing of net neutrality is actually good. Because I hear a lot of people, you know, vouch for net neutrality. But what about the other guys? Let me hear what you got to say. Let's see what happens. At the end of the day, what I always say when people ask me what my view is, whatever promotes competition, because competition leads to lower pricing. Lower pricing typically leads to more consumers on board, and that's always good for everybody. That's what I want. I want competition. No monopolies, oligopolies, none of that shit, all right? And last but not least, I think traffic should be treated equally across the board. Now, if you're not happy and you want Congress to step in and overturn the vote, do that now, because you only have 60 days from when the decision was made. So by mid-February, if Congress can't or won't step in on the FCC's decision to repeal net neutrality, we're going to be stuck with this one for a while. Okay, that's about it for this video, guys. I'm going to see you guys in the next video. Stay tuned.